So with the starting of the new school year, we thought this might be a good time to celebrate the history and the evolution of the Earlville school system. It'd take hours to talk about the challenges and successes of the system over the past 185 years if you think about when the first settlers got here. So today we're going to focus on much of the building expansion, especially the early years, and then hopefully those of you who went to school here would be willing to share some of your memories at the school. Now, when the early settlers got here in the early 1830s, they already knew the importance of education. They homeschooled their children, they got groups of children and brought them into their home. And by 1840, just several years later, we had the first board of trustees formed. The very first public school was started in a small building in the location of the current Presbyterian Church at the corner of Ottawa and Union Streets. We believe that that was land owned by Alexander Hamel, but I'm not certain enough to tell you that for sure. The first actual new school building was built in 1857. There was a very rapid growth of the town when the Burlington Railroad came in around 1853. So they erected a two-story brick building on the northwest corner of Stilson and Union Street at the cost of about $6,000. So this is where many of us know the old school was at. This was in the very same location. It was thought to be the first brick building in Earlville. However, before the school was even a year old, it was blown up in dynamite in retaliation of the arrest of Jonathan Reed. Now, Jonathan Reed was a saloon owner in town, and he was known to serve bad whiskey, to the point that it was making people sick, and some people even mysteriously died after imbibing. So the citizens took the law in their own hands, stormed the tavern, took all of his liquor, threw it on the floor, broke all the bottles, threw it into the streets, and Reed turned around and had them all arrested. However, the tables turned because Jonathan Reed ended up being arrested and the citizens were all acquitted. But he, along with John King and T.C. Cook, formed a conspiracy, and they hired a well-known criminal by the name of Ben Letts. He was notable in the East for blowing up Brock's Monument in Canada and running a steamer over Niagara Falls. Well, he was found, arrested, and shot the same day, and the others were brought to punishment before the citizens could get their hands on him. This is a picture of the school. It was built shortly after the explosion, but of course the kids all had to go back to being educated in the home for almost 2 years before this was opened in 1860. It was a two-story wood frame building that was built in the same location. A very simple design, most likely due to the hurried need for the place to house the students. The cupola was the only real defining architectural feature of the building. Now, there were 2 stories and 2 classrooms, one classroom on the bottom floor, one classroom on the second floor. When you started on the first floor. And once you learned everything that was taught there, then you moved to the upper floor. And once you learned everything that was taught there, you simply quit going to school. Remember that these were only 8th grade educations at the time. Most of the coursework, again, was only through 8th grade education until 1883, when 2 years of high school were added. A superintendent at the time was L.J. Quantrell, so he was the actual first superintendent of the high school. In 1890, 3rd year was added, and then in 1900, the 4th year of high school was added. So several buildings, several additions were made to this building, and if you look at the next slide, you can see that here's an example of one of the additions that was put on. The first high school graduation then was in 1885 with only 3 members. Now remember, that was only 2 years of high school study at the time. And then 6 years later, in 1891, the Earlville Alumni Association was formed, making this year its 135th year of existence. The decision to build another school started in about 1893, with much debate over the next 7 years. In 1900, however, the LaSalle County Superintendent of Schools declared that 1860 building was inadequate and the town was forced to either upgrade the current building or erect a new facility. The location of the new school was not without controversy either. Some of them wanted it positioned in the corner of the lot as opposed to in the center, so it was more available land for sporting activities. So in April of 1900, the voters finally approved bonds for a new schoolhouse. Again, it was built in the same general location as the old school, but the old wooden school then was uprooted and moved to the corner lot so that kids could continue to go to school there while the new building was being made. It always just intrigues me how they just picked up buildings and moved them back in the 1800s and 1900s. Construction started in the school in July of that year. And by January of 1901, students moved into the new building. All right, now think about that. The voters approved the bonds in April, the construction started in July, and in January of the next year, 6 months later, that school was in had full capacity and lasted for another 77 years. The cost of this school was about $1,700,000, and it was built by bricks manufactured in the local brickyard, which was where? The golf course. So the old wooden school was eventually demolished, except for a portion of it that was purchased by Dr. Tillman, who was the veterinarian at the time. He took that portion of the building, moved it to Main Street, and it became his veterinarian office. This actually, if you think about it, this is in what would now be known as the parking lot behind the post office. If you look to the right of this picture, you can see the DX or Bots gas station, or however you remember it. But again, it was at the current location of the post office parking lot. So this is the new building. This is while it's still under construction. The new building was built in a Romanesque style, a design that was meant to signal progress. Many of the schools that were built around that time also were built in that particular style. During the construction, remnants of the old original brick schoolhouse were found. Now, how many people in this room attended this school? All right, lots. We'll go through a few more of the school views here, but I do want you to share your memories as we go through, or at the end if you wish. This is a 1913 picture of the students planting ivy. So a very bare building until that ivy grew up. I just love this picture. It's one of my very favorite pictures of the school. I think it just is such a gorgeous, gorgeous building. So a couple other views. This one is looking north. That would actually be Union Street in the foreground. And it shows that early on, the playground equipment was on the south side of the lot. But all the trees and how much different it looked as we all grew up. Those who went to school probably recall several unique features of the school. One of them being the drinking fountain or the trough. Probably everyone that went to that school probably has a story or two about freezing their lips on there when they got just a little too close in the fall or winter. Or perhaps you were one of those bad boys that blew into the thing or put your fingers over it as the girls came over to get a drink and it squirted clear up and into their face. As I look at the entrance of this school, I'm reminded of Mrs. Richards, who was the school principal at the time that I was there. There was a bell inside, or a rope inside where if you were lucky, you got to pull the rope to ring the bell. But she would touch all of us on, she would greet everybody on the way in and she'd touch everybody's head. And she'd say, single file, hats off, single file, hats off. Ask me why I remember that silly little thing and I can't remember anything else that's important. Kindergarten was in the basement. If you were there, you remember the squeaky floors, the two great big stairwells that led to the first and second floor classrooms. We do know that there was a cannon that was on the school grounds at one time. We believe it was in the northeast corner. We don't have any pictures of it, but it was not unusual for after the wars for some of the cannons to be donated to parks and schools and so forth. So we're still looking for that. Okay, another unique feature of the 1900 building was the boulder that was donated by the class of 1906. It was supposedly pulled out of Indian Creek by the students. Now that's a big boulder, I don't know. In later years, R.A. Strong had the inscription 1906 engraved in honor of his wife, Pearlie Walker Strong, who was a member of that class. These are just a few fun photos that were in our archives that I wanted to share. The one on the upper left-hand corner, again, early on, probably early 1900s, and it shows a 4th grade class doing calisthenics. And then in the lower left-hand corner was actually a newspaper article, and it was in 1911, and it spoke of the manual training class that the boys were in, assuming that's like a precursor to industrial arts. And then the one on the right, I like to post this every May on Facebook because these were the May Day activities where we had the maypole around the flagpole. I think this is like a 1960s kind of picture because we have had people that have identified themselves in this. And then in 1938, new regulations for fire safety created a need to install 5 large tubular fire escapes. So this meant summertime fun for some or intense anxiety for other students. When in class, there was always somebody that was identified as the person or persons to open the door if you had a real fire or a drill. Always wanted to be friendly with those people because they were to assist you down the thing, and that usually referred to a little bit of a shove, especially if you were scared of it. Of course, the first 2 people down had to sit and help the others out, and you wanted to be friends with them too, because otherwise you'd land on your bum. Another place that may be familiar to some in this room is on the right-hand side, which is the rail. Al Matisse, I heard your name mentioned. So this is where the naughty kids sat whenever they acted up at recess. I personally have not had any experience with that, but I certainly know a lot of people who did. So this building closed in 1977, but it was the location for the J.C. Haunted House until it was demolished in 1981. And it was a great haunted house. I just want to point out right now a couple of artifacts we have here at the museum. If you turn around and look up on the shelf, Brute Schreckengoss saved fire doors from when the building was demolished. So we have those here in the building. We have a brick from the 1900 school. Of course, we have Miss Gallagher's window hook, the tall one that you had to be able to get the windows up and down. And then, of course, we have Miss Gallagher and Mrs. Carter's kindergarten classes. So backing up a little bit, in 1917, the governmental requirement for physical education created a need for a new gymnasium. Now, this was built on the northeast corner of Union and Chestnut Street, and it would be used for basketball and other athletics, and as an assembly hall for school and community events such as sock hops, post-prom, or how many people took ballroom dancing from Mr. and Mrs. Cunningham. The cost of this building was $8,600. Shortly after, in 1920, the school purchased 4 acres across the road for an athletic field and playground. And Superintendent L.B. Mann was credited for bringing team athletics to the school system. This was closed and demolished in 1982, just a year after the other school. In 1926, the Earlville Community High School was organized and the rural boundaries were extended, resulting in an increased enrollment. Again, we had inadequate room and equipment, and it became an issue with the Department of Public Instruction, who warned that if we didn't do something, that we would lose credit at the universities. Residents voted for $75,000 in bonds to build a new high school in 1926 across the street from the current building, or the current school. And this photo was taken when they were laying the cornerstone in 1926. This is just a picture of the cornerstone and who happened to be on the Board of Education at the time. They made a time capsule with significant items of that time, and they placed them in a copper box and buried the cornerstone during a ceremonies that was conducted by board president Dr. E.H. Rayson. So we all need to remember that if we're here when this gets torn down, there is a treasure box, a time capsule in that particular cornerstone. I wondered if there was one when they tore down the original 1900 building. I never saw anything about that. So this is the completed building, and at this point, all high school students were moved across the street and into this building. Now, war affects all of us, and in 1942, the teachers, administration, and students joined the war effort, purchasing war bonds or stamps that totaled $4,423. What I read was every single student except one participated. Didn't say who. Of that total, the faculty purchased a Jeep using $975 in those war bonds. In this picture are Superintendent Taylor, John Olson, Margaret Bullock, Helen Ruby, Aurelia Pergande, Lillian Hollister, Theodore Zimmerman, and H.O. Worsley. Of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't take some time to talk about the importance of country school. We could spend our entire time here talking about country school, but we'll try and just hit the highlights here. With limited transportation, the school building in town was really just reserved for the town kids until there was high school that was added to it. The rural students attended one-room schoolhouses closer to their homes, and all levels of classes through 8th grade were taught by the same teacher. The older students helped the younger ones. Each school was named after the farmer who owned the land, and if you look at our country school display that's up the front, at the very front part of the school display here, you'll see a map that shows all the different country schools that were here. Now, sometimes the country school had two different names because if someone else bought that property, it changed names. At one time, LaSalle County had over 250 schools, all within 1 to 2 miles apart throughout the county, so that the students didn't have to walk too far. Now, we selected this particular photo from the 1940s to show the wood stove that was located in the back of the room. My friend Laverle tells us a lot of stories about country school and emphasizes that the students learned far more than academics at country school. They learned how to haul the wood in for the furnace, pump the water from the well, fill the ink wells, beat the erasers, and so on and so forth. It was just you and the teacher and no support staff. Did I get that right, Laverle? The country school system closed in 1948, sending all of those grade school students to the public school in town and further increasing the population there. All those country school houses were put up for auction, and many of them were purchased and moved to town to be used as a residence, and some of them are still standing. Okay, and there's actually a couple of those country schools on that street, on Grant Street. Larry Bird's house is a country school, and then of course the Duffy School was moved to school grounds was purchased by the school and moved to the school grounds for band practice and instrument storage. And the Duffy Schoolhouse on the property now is being used as the school's early learning center. In 1949, the new community building was built next to the high school in what was previously an athletic field. It included a gymnasium and a cafeteria, and it allowed Earlville to host festivals and community functions that they were never able to do before this. It was also the year that the school organized as a community unit school district. You can see we loved the fact that Jim Feld gave us his cafeteria ticket so we could put that up there. A tunnel was created to connect the high school building with the new community building. However, the grade school kids across the street still had to be walked to and from the cafeteria every day at noon. With the country schools closing and the post-war baby boom, the student population continued to increase. In 1957 was actually the highest birth rate of the baby boomers. The brick building across the street was becoming crowded, and the new wing to the south of the high school was added so that the junior high kids could be moved over. So now over across the street, we only have grade school children. Several years later, in 1963, the west wing was added to house the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders in an effort to move more of the grade school over to what was now known as the main campus. The cost of this was $225,000. A couple notes just on my own memories of this. I was in 6th grade when this happened. So when we started to school that fall, the 4th and 5th grade classrooms were all done, but the 6th grade classrooms were not. I was in Miss Gallagher's class. The other 6th grade class was Mrs. Schreckengoss. And when we started school, we started in the gymnasium, the community building. The Miss Gallagher's class was up on the balcony. Mrs. Schreckengoss' class was on the stage, and every morning they opened all the curtains. We all faced the flag. We all said the Pledge of Allegiance. We closed the curtains, and we all went on to our schoolwork. And I think that probably lasted about a month until we were able to get into our new classrooms. This is an aerial view, especially for those of you who never saw or knew the location of the 1900 building that we talked about earlier. So this is looking north. You can see the football field on the foreground, the baseball field, which is now where the new daycare is at, which we'll talk about in a bit. But then across the street, the arrow to the far right points to the 2-story brick building, and then to the left of that is where the gymnasium was at. Duplexes are in that area now. And then in 1966, the board hired a very interesting science teacher by the name of Rudy Timmerman. He was eccentric, but he also loved astronomy. And he and his students built this observatory in the southwest corner of the school property. It was funded by local donors and Marathon Electric. Many community members donated their skill and materials to the project. I was hoping Vernon Williamson was going to be here this morning. He's one of our new volunteers, and he was one of 3 students who spent hours and hours grinding the lens for this observatory. So whenever there was something exciting happening in the galaxies, the science students had a great view and a great education. I can remember going at 2 o'clock in the morning, my class going to the observatory because there was something going on in the skies that night. It was torn down and the parts were sold in 1983. Rudy was here from 66 to 75, but it was torn down in 1983 as none of the future science teachers had an interest or knowledge of what to do with it. In 1990, a new addition was built to connect the south wing to the west wing and made it possible to separate the grade school children from those evil junior high and high school students, protect them a little bit more. And then in 2001, a very large expansion happened. The library, science, and computer lab, plus a new gymnasium, were erected. And so to confuse us old folks, this now became known as the new gym. And the community building became known as the old gym. And that was very mind-blowing for all of us that have referred to the community building as the new gym for years. And then finally, in an effort to meet the needs of the community, a new space was added for child daycare. No one would have ever thought years ago that your school would have been responsible for providing daycare. This will be opening in the fall. So to remain an independent unit district is a challenge. Consolidation discussions have been considered as far back as 1960s. Our school system has defied the odds and continues to provide a good education for the students here. And this is just a short list of the challenges that all schools face. Of course, funding and regulations always has to be at the top. And then student enrollment, too much, too little. Baby boomer birth rates peaked, as I mentioned, in 1957, which meant all of those kids were coming into the school system in the 1960s and 70s. Enrollment at Earlville was as high as 600 during that time. Classes in sizes in the 50s were not unusual. As birth rates declined and the job opportunities in Earlville dried up, the enrollment decreased, and I think the current enrollment hovers around 400. Other things that are mentioned in here, integration of kids with special needs in the classroom, providing meals, rapid adaptation to technology, staffing, keeping qualified teachers. Prior to 1930, most careers centered around agriculture for men, homemaking for women. And as an industry developed, jobs opened for machinists, laborers, and construction workers. During the war, women were even taken into the factories due to the men entering the service. Ann and I were talking about this the other day. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was an expectation to go to college, but as a woman, you really had three choices. You could become a teacher, a nurse, or a secretary. Done. Suddenly, everybody started attending college, and what happened next? There became a shortage in trades. We didn't have carpenters, plumbers, electricians, so the school responded by entering into a relationship with IVVC and other trade-interested educational programs. Now the classes prep students for business, entrepreneurship, and careers with a technology focus. And what about AI? How is that going to change? Those early agricultural jobs are now far more complex and require technological skill sets along with a lot of business savvy. Our school system continues to do a wonderful job in adapting to the changes and challenges ahead. They have shown that small does not necessarily mean less. We have to talk about COVID just for a second. Probably the single biggest challenge to the school system, probably in the entire century, has been COVID. The fact that they had to pivot quickly to do home learning, and just what it did to the rest of us is nothing that we want to repeat again. So I thought in closing we'd talk just a few things, a few little tidbits that we found when we were doing our research. In 1910, the school board declared that in view of the fact that teachers at all times spend sums of money that they appear in school and out of school in proper clothing, we recommend that they be employed at $60 a month. And remember, these were all women for the most part and could not be married at that time. In 1918, the official cap and gown was adopted. There were girls' sports as early as 1917. However, there were decades where the only girls' sport was through GAA. And that changed in 1973 with volleyball and in 80 in basketball when they were added to our conferences. Graduations were held at other locations, such as a Universalist church and Robinson Hall before a gymnasium or assembly hall was at the school. The Earlville Fight Song was composed in 1935 by Charlotte Atherton Cole and Laura Marshall to the song Wave the Flag, which was the fight song of the University of Chicago, T.O. Zimmerman's alma mater. We still sing it today. My mom would be happy. The first Raider image was designed by Teresa Norton from the class of '63, and newer images were completed by art students Jack Yauk and Kathy Kirby. Stuart Montooth had a rifle club in 1965, and there are people that just don't understand about what it is to come to school with your rifle on your back. On the school bus, right. It wasn't until the winter of 1970 when the school board approved a dress code to allow change to allow girls to wear pants. And at that point, it had to be a pantsuit. It could not be just pants. Other than that, girls always in the wintertime had to wear pants underneath their dresses and then take them off when they got to school. Again, going back to the fire escapes. In August of '71, Earlville was one of 2 marching bands selected to perform in Springfield during the motorcade of President Nixon during the Illinois State Fair. And Lisa Boltz created the EHS coat of arms in 1976. So progress and evolution will continue into the future, but it's important to preserve the history that has brought us all to today. The past still lives on in front of the community building, the old gym, where the cornerstones and other artifacts from the brick building are on display. There's nothing that signifies what that is. Well, I went over because I wanted to take a picture of it. Obviously, the cornerstones are what they are. They have the names engraved in and such, and we all know what the rock is. but there's no way to authenticate whether or not that was the bell. But anyway, that's one thing that I would like to see our organization do, is to maybe make a plaque or something that recognizes what those were.